He should not have made it to the gate, not with the rain coming down sideways and the night swallowing every sound except thunder. Yet there he was, a white German Shepherd K9 dragging himself across the wet asphalt outside Camp Lejeune, one paw reaching forward, then the other, his pale coat stained with mud, his breath coming in thin clouds that vanished beneath the yellow security lights. The sentry at Post 3 saw him first as a shape moving through the storm, low to the ground, almost ghost-like against the black fence line. For a moment, Private Nolan Price thought the wind had torn loose a tarp from one of the supply trucks. Then the shape lifted its head, and two amber eyes caught the light. They were not wild eyes. They were not empty. They were focused on the gate like it was the last safe place left in the world. Nolan stepped out from the guard booth, rain tapping hard against his helmet, one hand raised to stop the inbound maintenance truck rolling slow toward inspection. "Hold up," he called, his voice tight. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He only pulled himself another few inches forward, leaving a faint trail through the shallow water gathering in the cracks of the road. Around his neck hung a worn black collar, and tied to that collar was something wrapped in clear plastic, small and square, knocking softly against his chest each time he moved. Nolan's stomach dropped before he knew why. Military dogs did not wander alone to a Marine base in the middle of a coastal storm. Not like this. Not with a message tied to them like a prayer no one had spoken out loud. By the time Staff Sergeant Lucas Hayes reached the gate, the rain had turned cold enough to sting. Lucas was 37, a black Marine with broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, and the quiet, watchful presence of a man who had learned to listen before he spoke. His uniform was darkened by rain in seconds, but he did not seem to notice. He moved past the guard booth, past the idling truck, and crouched 10 feet from the dog, slow enough not to frighten him. The white K9 stopped moving. His ears trembled. His chest rose and fell too quickly. Lucas held out one hand, palm open, letting the dog read him the way dogs read truth, through scent and stillness. "Easy, boy," he said, low and steady. "You made it. You're here." The dog stared at him for one long second. Then his body gave out, not in fear, but in surrender. He lowered his head to the pavement, eyes still open, still fixed on Lucas, as if handing over a duty he could no longer carry. Something inside Lucas tightened. He had seen that look before in places far from North Carolina, in men who stayed awake through pain because someone else still needed them. The storm rolled across the base, rattling the chain-link fence and bending the wet grass along the roadside. From the distance came the low hum of generators, the metallic clink of a loose flagpole rope, the muted rhythm of boots as more Marines gathered near the gate but kept back when Lucas lifted a hand. The dog smelled of rain, road dust, and exhaustion. Beneath the mud, his fur was almost snow-white, thick around the neck and shoulders, the kind of coat that would have shone bright in daylight. Now it clung to him in uneven strands, making him look smaller than he was. Lucas eased closer, inch by inch, until his fingers brushed the side of the dog's neck. The K9 flinched, then stilled. No snap. No warning. Just a weary breath, warm against Lucas's wrist. "That's it," Lucas whispered. "I've got you." As he slid one arm beneath the dog's chest, he noticed the object tied to the collar again. Clear plastic. Medical tape. Inside it, folded tight, was a piece of paper marked by water at the edges. There was also a small silver tag, not standard issue, scratched nearly smooth except for one word pressed into the metal: Mercy. Lucas froze. The word hit harder than it should have. Mercy was not a name people chose by accident. Not for a dog who had crawled through a storm to reach Marines. Not with a note sealed against his heart. "Sergeant?" Nolan asked behind him, barely louder than the rain. Lucas did not answer right away. The dog shifted against him, a fragile weight of muscle, fur, and will. Then, with the last of his strength, the K9 lifted his muzzle and pressed it against Lucas's sleeve, just once, as if confirming he had found the right man. The plastic packet tapped softly against the sergeant's wrist. Tap, 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 like a clock running out. Lucas looked toward the base infirmary lights glowing half a mile beyond the gate, blurred gold through the rain. He stood with the dog in his arms, careful and firm, feeling the animal's heartbeat flutter against his forearm. "Open the gate," he said. No one questioned him. The barrier lifted. The maintenance truck backed away. And under the storm-bent flag, Staff Sergeant Lucas Hayes carried the white K9 into Camp Lejeune while every Marine at Post 3 stood silent, watching the small package tied to the collar, all of them feeling the same unspoken truth. Whatever Mercy had brought to their gate tonight, it had not come from nowhere. And it had not come too soon. The infirmary doors opened before Lucas reached them, pushed wide by Corporal Jenna Whitaker, who had heard the call over the radio and came running in gray scrubs beneath a rain jacket thrown on backward. Warm light spilled across the walkway, turning the rain into silver threads. The moment Lucas stepped inside, the storm seemed to fall away behind him, replaced by the clean smell of antiseptic, wet canvas, and coffee left too long on a burner. Mercy lay limp in his arms, but his eyes remained open, following the room with a soldier's caution. He did not whine. He did not fight. That silence bothered Lucas more than any sound could have. A dog that strong should have protested being carried. A trained K9 should have measured every stranger, every door, every shadow. Mercy only breathed, shallow and fast, as if he had spent every ounce of himself getting to the gate and had nothing left to spend on fear. "Table 2, Jenna said, clearing a stainless steel exam table with one sweep of her arm. Gently. Lucas lowered him down, keeping one hand beneath the dog's neck until Mercy's paws touched the folded blanket. The white fur looked even brighter under the fluorescent lights, though mud clung to his legs and belly in dark streaks. His collar was old but cared for, the black nylon softened by use, the buckle polished in places where fingers must have touched it often. The plastic packet tied to it rested against his chest like a secret with a pulse. Jenna leaned close, her face calm in the way medical people learn to be calm when everyone else wants to panic. Male German Shepherd, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Dehydrated. Exhausted. Paw pads worn raw from distance, but no obvious major trauma. She glanced at Lucas. How far did he come? Lucas looked toward the window, where rain ran down the glass in trembling lines. Far enough to know where he was going. Private Nolan Price stood just inside the door, dripping on the tile, still pale from what he had seen at the gate. 2 more Marines waited outside the room, silent, boots planted shoulder-width apart, as if guarding a sleeping child. Jenna worked quickly. She checked Mercy's gums, his temperature, the beat of his heart beneath the thick fur. She wrapped warm towels around him, then started fluids with careful hands while murmuring the kind of soft nonsense that animals somehow understand better than perfect words. There you go, handsome. You're safe now. Nobody is rushing you. Mercy's ears twitched at her voice, but his gaze kept returning to Lucas. It was not attachment yet. It was recognition. Not of the man, maybe, but of what the man represented. A uniform. A smell. A promise. Lucas stood near the table, rainwater dripping from his sleeves onto the floor, and tried to ignore the tightness in his chest. He had been back from overseas for 3 years, but some nights still carried the old sounds. Tires over gravel. A radio cutting out. A friend laughing just before the world changed. He had learned to put those memories in a locked room inside himself. Mercy had walked straight to that door and scratched at it. "Sergeant," Jenna said quietly, "we need to remove the collar to treat him properly." Lucas nodded, but when his fingers reached for the buckle, Mercy lifted his head. Not much. Only an inch. Enough. A low sound formed in his throat, not a threat, more like a warning from someone too tired to explain. Lucas stopped. "You do not want us taking it off," he said. Mercy stared at him. Rain ticked against the windows. The room seemed to wait. Lucas shifted his hand away from the buckle and touched the plastic packet instead. Mercy's body tensed, then softened. "Not the collar," Lucas murmured. "The message." Jenna exchanged a look with Nolan. Lucas untied the wet cord carefully, not pulling, not tearing, the way he might have handled a folded flag or a child's drawing saved from a fire. The plastic had been wrapped 3 times and sealed with medical tape. Whoever had done it knew the storm was coming. Whoever had done it believed this dog would make it. Inside was a small photograph, blurred at the edges, but still clear enough to see a little girl in a red winter coat kneeling beside Mercy in a yard filled with yellow leaves. She had one arm around his neck and a gap-toothed smile full of sunlight. Behind the photograph was a folded note, written in dark blue ink, the letters uneven but deliberate. Lucas opened it with both hands. Nolan leaned forward without meaning to. Jenna stopped moving. The first line was simple. "Please help my dog." Lucas swallowed. He read on, each word pulling the room deeper into a silence no one wanted to break. "His name is Mercy. He is not lost. He knows Marines are safe. My dad said so. If he reaches you, please look in the old white church by Route 17 before morning. There are others waiting." Lucas felt the air change. Outside, thunder rolled low over Camp Lejeune. Mercy, weak as he was, lifted his head again at the sound of the note unfolding. His amber eyes found Lucas, steady through the pain and fatigue. Not begging. Reporting. A mission delivered. Lucas looked at the photograph once more, at the little girl's hand buried in Mercy's snow-white fur, then toward the dark road beyond the infirmary window. "Jenna," he said, voice quiet but firm, "keep him warm. Nolan, get Lieutenant Brooks on the line. Tell him we may have civilians needing help off base near Route 17. Nolan straightened. "Yes, Sergeant." Lucas placed the photograph beside Mercy's paw. The dog lowered his nose to it, touching the little girl's face through the plastic with a tenderness that made everyone in the room look away for half a second. Some messages arrive by radio, some by siren, and some come through the rain on 4 tired paws, carrying the kind of trust no human being has the right to waste. The call went out across the base in a voice that sounded too calm for the storm outside. Possible civilian distress near Route 17. Limited details. Medical standby advised. Within minutes, the quiet infirmary became a place of restrained motion. Radios clipped to belts. Rain jackets pulled over uniforms. A map spread across the counter beside a half-empty coffee cup. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks arrived with water still running from the brim of his cover, a lean officer in his early 40s with patient blue eyes and a face that looked carved by long nights of responsibility. He read the note once, then again, not because the words were hard to understand, but because their simplicity made them heavy. "Please look in the old white church before morning. There are others waiting. Route 17 has 3 abandoned churches within 15 miles, Brooks said, tracing a finger along the wet map. Only one is white, if the county records are current. St. Mark's Chapel. Closed after the last hurricane season. About 12 miles from the south gate." Nolan stood near the door, already wearing his poncho, trying not to stare at Mercy on the exam table. "Sir, who sends a dog with a note instead of calling 911? The question hung there, innocent and terrible. Lucas looked at Mercy. The dog had not slept. His body needed rest, but every time the men spoke of Route 17, his ears moved toward them, alert beneath exhaustion. Jenna had wrapped his paws and settled warming blankets over his back. Even then, he kept his nose close to the photograph of the little girl, guarding it with the quiet dignity of a promise. Lucas answered without looking away. Someone who could not call. Someone who knew this dog would not quit. Brooks folded the note carefully and handed it back to Lucas. "You know we have to notify county deputies." "Already asked dispatch to patch them in," Lucas said. "But the storm has roads washed out north of Jacksonville. If civilians are sheltering near that chapel, we may reach them faster." Brooks studied him for a moment. He knew Lucas Hayes well enough to recognize when duty had become personal, and wise enough not to mistake that for weakness. "Take 1 vehicle. 2 Marines. No heroics. You locate, assess, and coordinate with local responders." "Understood." Lucas nodded. "Understood." Then Mercy moved. It was small, barely more than a push of his front legs against the blanket, but every eye in the room turned. Jenna placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "No, sweetheart. You are not going anywhere." Mercy tried again, trembling with the effort. His breath hitched. His amber eyes locked on Lucas with a clarity that made command feel almost irrelevant. Lucas stepped close. "You got us here," he said softly. "Now let us go the rest of the way." Mercy did not settle. Instead, he nudged the photograph toward Lucas with his nose. Once. Twice. The room went still. Lucas picked it up, and only then did the dog lower his head, as if the transfer had been made official. Outside, the rain hammered the roof hard enough to drown the silence that followed. 5 minutes later, Lucas climbed into a tan utility vehicle with Nolan in the passenger seat and Lieutenant Brooks on the radio line from the base. The windshield wipers fought the storm in a frantic rhythm, smearing the lights of Camp Lejeune into long gold lines. As they rolled through the south gate, Lucas felt the photograph tucked inside the waterproof pocket of his jacket. He had not looked at it again, but he could feel its weight. A little girl in a red coat. A white dog named Mercy. A church before morning. The road beyond the base was nearly empty, black and shining under the headlights. Pine trees bent in the wind, their branches tossing like restless hands. Drainage ditches overflowed along the shoulders, and every low spot in the pavement flashed silver with standing water. Nolan kept one hand on the dash and the other around the radio microphone, his young face lit green by the display. "Sergeant," he said after several miles, "do you think the girl is still there?" Lucas did not answer right away. The tires hissed through rainwater. A road sign for Route 17 appeared and vanished in the dark. "I think Mercy believed she was," he said. Nolan swallowed. "That is enough for me." Lucas kept driving. The storm seemed to press against the vehicle from every side, but beneath it he heard other things. The soft tap of the plastic packet against his wrist. Mercy's breath against his sleeve. The way the dog had touched the photograph, as if touching a face he loved. These were not clues in a mystery. They were pieces of a heart that had refused to break alone. 7 miles out, the radio crackled with dispatch updates. County deputies were delayed by flooding near a bridge. Emergency medical teams were staging farther south. St. Mark's Chapel sat on a service road half a mile off the main highway, surrounded by old farmland and longleaf pine. No active power. No regular caretaker. Lucas turned onto the smaller road just as lightning brightened the sky for a breath. In that white flash, they saw it. A church at the edge of a field, paint peeling but still pale against the dark, its steeple leaning slightly as if tired from years of weather. One window glowed faintly, not electric, but warm and trembling, like a candle sheltered by careful hands. Nolan whispered, "Someone is inside." Lucas slowed the vehicle, headlights sweeping across the chapel steps, the sagging porch, the muddy tracks leading to the door. And there, pressed into the wet ground beside the entrance, were paw prints. Large. Familiar. Mercy had been here. He had left this place, crossed 12 miles of storm and road and darkness, and found the one gate where people trained to protect would understand a mission without needing it explained. Lucas turned off the engine. The sudden quiet felt holy. Rain drummed on the roof. The candlelight flickered behind the glass. He pulled the photograph from his pocket and looked at the little girl's smiling face one more time before opening the door. "Stay sharp," he told Nolan, his voice low. "And stay gentle." Together they stepped into the rain, not knowing what waited inside the old white church, only knowing that a wounded dog had spent everything he had to send them there. The chapel doors creaked softly as Lucas pushed them open, rainwater dripping from the edges and pooling on the worn wooden floor. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of wax, aged wood, and something softer, like blankets tucked in corners. Shadows stretched long along the walls, stretching toward the single candle that flickered on the altar, sending tremors of gold across peeling white paint. Mercy patted in first, paws silent on the floor, nose lowered, sniffing each shadow with the precision of a dog who had traveled miles for a purpose. Lucas followed slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim interior, heart tight with expectation and worry. Nolan stayed close, keeping a hand lightly on the door frame for balance, taking in the faint outlines of pews lined with dust and the soft rustle of the wind outside moving through the broken windows. A small figure appeared at the far end, huddled under a patchwork quilt on the top step of the altar platform. Her coat, red and soaked, clung to her slight frame. She had wide eyes that reflected both fear and hope, and she held her small hands close to her chest, gripping what looked like a stuffed animal. Mercy stopped immediately, tail lowering, ears pricked forward. He stared for a heartbeat, then took 2 careful steps, cautious and deliberate, toward the girl. Lucas and Nolan stopped as well, letting the dog lead, giving him the authority of the moment. Lucas kept his voice soft, almost a whisper against the sound of rain hitting the broken glass outside. "It is all right," he said. "You are safe now." The girl looked up, eyes blinking against the low light, and a faint gasp escaped her lips. Mercy stopped at a few feet away and sat, looking between the girl and Lucas, judging, waiting. Lucas knelt slowly, careful not to crowd either of them, hands open, calm. "I am Lucas," he said. "This is Mercy. He found you. We will take care of you." The girl nodded, uncertain, and the quilt fell slightly from her shoulders, revealing more of her small, shivering form. Mercy let out a soft exhale and inched closer, nose reaching the edge of the quilt. The girl extended a tentative hand, and Mercy pressed his muzzle gently against it, tilting his head as if granting permission for trust. Nolan handed her a dry towel from his pack, and she wrapped it around herself, the warmth drawing a slight smile, the first Lucas had seen. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the chapel, a quiet sense of calm settled, the kind that comes when the first piece of fear is replaced with safety. Lucas rose slowly, scanning the room, noticing details he had not expected, a pair of small shoes tucked under a pew, a faint trail of footprints in the dust leading from the door, a backpack left carelessly beside the altar. Mercy settled at the girl's side, curling slightly, keeping his head level with hers, giving her a sense of guardianship beyond his size. Lucas spoke again, gently. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl hesitated, looking from Mercy to Lucas, then whispered, "Clara." Lucas nodded. "Clara, we are going to get you somewhere warm, food, and dry clothes. Do you know anyone we should call?" She shook her head, lips pressed together. Lucas looked down at Mercy, who lifted his amber eyes toward him as if confirming that she was alone, yet safe in his presence. The candlelight flickered across the dog's white coat, highlighting the streaks of mud and rain, yet his posture was noble, patient, and protective. Lucas guided Clara gently to stand, keeping one hand close to hers, Mercy walking ahead, pacing slightly, checking every corner as if ensuring no other danger remained. Nolan swept a glance through the chapel, noting the safety of the perimeter despite the broken windows, the fallen plaster, and the uneven floorboards. Lucas pulled out his radio, speaking quietly but firmly, relaying their position and requesting immediate support, medics and blankets to meet them at St. Mark's Chapel. Mercy remained beside Clara, nose occasionally brushing against her shoulder, steadying her trembling frame, a silent sentinel. Lucas watched the interaction, understanding that this moment, the first minutes after rescue, would form a bond that would remain unbroken. Each careful breath, each quiet movement, was a testament to the trust earned over miles of storm, mud, and darkness. The candlelight reflected in Lucas's dark eyes as he whispered again, "You are safe, Clara. We are here." Mercy let out a soft pant, settling fully beside her, and the storm outside became a distant sound, the chapel now a sanctuary forged not by walls, but by the loyalty, courage, and quiet miracle of a dog who had carried hope through rain and night to reach the one who needed it most. Lucas stayed close to Clara, guiding her toward the back of the chapel where an old wooden bench had been cleared of dust and cobwebs. Mercy padded along beside them, amber eyes scanning each corner, ears twitching at the faintest sound of the storm outside. The rain continued its steady fall, tapping a rhythmic cadence against the shattered windows, but inside, the air felt calm, almost sacred. Lucas pulled a small first aid kit from his pack and gently checked Clara's shoes and socks for dampness, making sure her feet were dry and warm. Mercy sat beside her, leaning slightly against her legs, offering steady warmth. Lucas noticed how the dog's white fur seemed almost luminous in the candlelight, and he realized the contrast between the storm outside and this quiet sanctuary made every movement feel amplified. Nolan placed a thermal blanket over Clara's shoulders, and the little girl tilted her head, resting briefly against Mercy as if seeking reassurance that he would not leave her side. Lucas crouched to Mercy's level, speaking softly in a tone the dog recognized. "Good boy, you kept her safe. You did exactly what you were supposed to do." Mercy gave a gentle wag of his tail, a subtle exhale, and settled more fully beside Clara, guarding her without the tension of the journey, more like a protector who had fulfilled his mission but remained vigilant. Outside, the storm rumbled faintly in the distance, and the lights from Lucas's vehicle flickered through the windows, casting shadows that danced across the peeling paint and old wooden beams. Lucas took a deep breath, thinking of the miles Mercy had traveled, the determination that had carried him through cold, mud, and wind, and he felt a surge of gratitude for the quiet miracle in front of him. He returned his gaze to Clara, who was finally beginning to relax, her fingers brushing against the dog's thick coat, tracing the path of his journey in a silent language of trust. Lucas stood and moved toward the small supply pack he had carried, pulling out a thermos of warm tea and 2 bottled waters, placing them within reach. "Drink slowly," he said, kneeling briefly beside her. Mercy shifted slightly to ensure Clara could reach the cup of water without stepping on him, his large paws careful and precise. Nolan checked the door and the broken windows, ensuring the storm had not brought in any hazards, then returned his attention to the pair. Lucas noticed the plastic packet from Mercy's collar had been tucked safely into his jacket, still damp from rain but intact. It had delivered them here, to the exact place where help and safety intersected, but its purpose had been fulfilled now, replaced by presence and warmth. Clara spoke softly, her voice trembling but clear. "He came all the way here for me?" Lucas nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, he knew where to find you. You were never alone, even in the storm." Mercy's head lifted slightly, eyes meeting Lucas's, and in that moment, the bond between Marine, dog, and child became undeniable, a shared understanding that they had crossed fear, distance, and uncertainty together. The candlelight flickered again, throwing a warm glow over the scene, highlighting Mercy's soft fur, the glint in his attentive eyes, and Clara's tentative smile. Lucas sat beside her, gently brushing raindamp strands from her forehead while Nolan began to radio for additional support, coordinating blankets, food, and safe transport for the child once the storm allowed. Mercy rested his head on Clara's lap, ears twitching at every faint sound from the outside world, still alert but comforted. Lucas watched him closely, noting the way every small breath, every gentle shift, was a testament to trust earned through perseverance, loyalty, and quiet courage. The chapel seemed to expand around them, every creak of the wood, every faint draft of wind, a reminder that they were safe for the moment, wrapped in a fragile yet steadfast sanctuary created by a dog who had crossed distance and danger to deliver hope. Time passed almost imperceptibly as the storm eased, the steady drip of water from the roof now soft and intermittent. Lucas kept his hand lightly on Mercy's back, feeling the warmth and the steady rise and fall of his chest, a living signal that every mile, every struggle, had been worth it. Clara's small hand rested against the dog, fingers weaving into fur, her earlier tension giving way to trust, and Lucas allowed himself a quiet breath of relief, knowing that the first step towards safety and warmth had been taken. Carried on the 4 paws of a determined white K9 who refused to leave anyone behind. The wind outside had finally begun to ease, leaving behind a soft drizzle that tapped gently against the chapel roof. Lucas stood by the door, eyes sweeping over the space once more, ensuring that Mercy and Clara were settled and that no other signs of danger lingered in the dim interior. The little girl had curled herself more comfortably under the thick blanket, her small hands still resting on Mercy's fur, feeling the warmth and steady pulse beneath her fingers. Mercy lifted his head briefly to look at Lucas, amber eyes shining with the reflection of the candlelight, and then returned to the quiet watch over Clara, his body relaxed yet alert, a sentinel who had accomplished the impossible. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to break through the clouds, casting a grayish-gold hue across the wet landscape. Lucas glanced out the window, noting the reflection of the broken steeple and the glistening pine trees, and he felt a sense of solemn pride for the journey that had brought them here. Every mile, every drop of rain, every step Mercy had taken across the dark roads of North Carolina had led them to this fragile sanctuary. Nolan moved quietly to the altar, adjusting the candle and ensuring that the path from the chapel doors to the pews remained clear. The quiet was punctuated by Mercy's soft exhale and the low drip of water from the eaves, creating a rhythm that matched the steady rise and fall of Clara's breathing. Lucas knelt beside the girl, his hand brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "You did very well," he said softly, not needing her to respond. Mercy gave a subtle shift, pressing closer to Clara, ears twitching at the faintest sound from the approaching light outside. Lucas opened his jacket pocket and retrieved the photograph again, smoothing the creased edges. He held it up to show Clara, who blinked at the image of herself smiling beside a younger Mercy, the memory of warmth and trust evident even in the faded colors. She reached out and touched it, her small finger tracing the outline of the dog, a connection that spanned time and distance, as if she had felt his loyalty long before he arrived. Lucas spoke in a low voice, steady and measured. "This is why he came. Because he remembered." The words seemed to hang in the air, almost sacred, as the candle flickered and shadows danced across the walls. Mercy responded with a soft nudge of his nose against the photograph, and Lucas felt the weight of that gesture, a silent affirmation that every decision, every effort, every step across the storm had mattered. Outside, the mist of early morning began to mingle with the residual rain, creating a soft haze that cloaked the surrounding farmland in silver. The chapel's open doors framed the scene, and Lucas thought of the miles ahead, the roads that would need to be traversed to reach warmth and care for Clara. He could feel Mercy's alertness, subtle and insistent, guiding him, reminding him of the dog's unwavering instinct and commitment. Nolan returned from checking the vehicle, giving a small nod to indicate it was ready to move once the group prepared to leave. Lucas looked down at Clara, now calmer, her fingers entwined in the dog's fur, and whispered, "We will get you where you need to be, and he will not leave your side." Mercy lifted his head again, giving a soft exhale that sounded almost like a sigh of satisfaction, his amber eyes meeting Lucas's with a depth that spoke of understanding, perseverance, and the quiet triumph of reaching a goal against all odds. The first rays of sunlight pierced through a break in the clouds, touching the wooden floorboards with warmth, highlighting the path they would take out of the chapel and towards safety. Every sound, from the faint drip of rain to the distant hum of base vehicles returning to duty, seemed to underscore the fragile miracle that had brought them together. Lucas helped Clara to stand, one hand firm but gentle, ensuring her balance against the uneven floor. Mercy stepped ahead of them, sniffing the air and scanning the interior one last time, ears moving in careful attention. Lucas took a deep breath, absorbing the stillness, the calm that had settled after the storm, and felt gratitude for the trust and courage embodied by the white K9 beside him. The world outside was still wet, still uncertain, but inside the chapel, a bond had been forged that no rain, no distance, no time could sever. Every cautious step toward the doors, every glance at Mercy, every heartbeat shared in quiet rhythm with Clara, confirmed that hope had arrived, carried by determination, loyalty, and a dog who had refused to leave anyone behind. The walk from the chapel doors to the utility vehicle felt longer than the 12 miles Mercy had crossed in the storm. Dawn had softened the sky over Route 17, turning the flooded ditches into strips of pale silver and lifting a thin mist from the fields. Lucas moved slowly, one hand supporting Clara beneath the blanket, the other ready in case the uneven ground shifted under her small steps. Nolan walked ahead, carrying the emergency pack and watching the mud for safe footing, while Mercy stayed close enough that his shoulder brushed Clara's knee with every careful pace. The dog was tired. Lucas could see it in the slight tremble of his legs and the way his head dipped between breaths. But Mercy would not be carried. Not yet. Every time Lucas reached down to help him, the white K9 lifted his amber eyes with quiet insistence, as if there was still one more duty he needed to complete. The church behind them stood in the gray morning like a witness, its peeling white walls glowing faintly as the first clear light touched the steeple. Lucas helped Clara into the back seat and tucked the thermal blanket around her, then waited while Mercy placed his front paws on the vehicle floor. For a second, the dog hesitated, strength wavering. Clara leaned forward, her voice barely louder than the drizzle. "Come on, Mercy." That was all he needed. With a soft grunt, he climbed in beside her and lowered himself across the floor mat, resting his head against her shoes. Lucas closed the door gently, then stood in the wet grass for one breath longer than necessary. He looked at the paw prints leading away from the chapel, deep at first, then fading where the rain had washed them thin. A trail of faith almost erased by weather. Almost. The radio crackled from Nolan's hand. County responders were approaching from the south. Medical transport was clear to meet them at the old gas station 2 miles down the road. Lieutenant Brooks wanted an update every 5 minutes. Lucas answered with calm precision, but his eyes stayed on the back window, where Clara's small hand had found Mercy's ear and held it softly between her fingers. The ride out was quiet. The tires moved through shallow water with a steady hiss, and the heater hummed warm air into the cabin, carrying the smells of damp wool, wet dog fur, and muddy leather. Clara sat strapped in beneath the blanket, calmer now but not fully at ease, watching the trees slide by as if making sure the dark road would not reach for her again. Mercy did not sleep. His eyes closed once, twice, but each time the vehicle turned, he opened them and checked Clara's face. Lucas watched through the rearview mirror, and something old inside him loosened. He had spent years believing strength meant holding pain without showing where it hurt. Mercy had crossed a storm and taught him something quieter. Strength could be a tired body refusing to stop until someone else was safe. At the gas station, red and white emergency lights reflected across puddles and boarded windows. Paramedics stepped forward with blankets and gentle voices. A deputy stood back, speaking softly into a phone, careful not to crowd the child. Lucas opened Clara's door, and Mercy lifted his head immediately, alert, uncertain. "Easy," Lucas said. "They're here to help." Clara looked at the paramedic, then at Mercy. "Can he come with me?" The question was small, but it changed the whole air around them. The paramedic, a woman named Denise with kind eyes and rain beads on her jacket, glanced at Lucas. "If he is stable enough, we can keep him near until the veterinarian meets us." Lucas looked at Mercy's bandaged paws, at the exhaustion folded into the dog's body, at the fierce light still burning behind his eyes. "He stays with her," Lucas said. No one argued. They moved Clara onto a warm blanket inside the ambulance, and Mercy followed with Lucas's help, stepping carefully, settling at the edge where his nose could touch her hand. Only then did his body begin to surrender to rest. His eyelids lowered. His breathing steadied. Clara's fingers remained in his fur. The ambulance doors stayed open while they waited for final clearance, and through that narrow frame Lucas saw the morning fully arrive over the wet highway. The storm had not disappeared, not completely. Clouds still hung low. Water still ran along the asphalt. But light had entered everything quietly, without permission. Jenna arrived from the base veterinary unit in a second vehicle, hair pulled back, field bag in hand, her face softening the moment she saw Mercy. She climbed into the ambulance and checked him with careful hands. "You stubborn, beautiful boy," she whispered. Mercy opened one eye, then let it close again, as if he recognized a voice from the place where safety began. Lucas stood just outside the doors, rain dripping from his sleeves, while Clara looked up at him from under the blanket. "Will you come too?" she asked. Lucas felt the weight of the photograph in his pocket and the weight of the morning around him. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." I will be right behind you." Clara's eyes moved to Mercy, and for the first time since the chapel, her face relaxed into something close to peace. The ambulance doors closed slowly, but not before Lucas saw Mercy press his nose against her palm, sealing the promise in the only language he needed. As the vehicle pulled onto the road, lights turning softly through the mist, Lucas followed in silence, understanding that some rescues do not end when someone is found. Sometimes, that is only where grace begins. The hospital on the edge of Jacksonville smelled of clean floors, warmed blankets, and raincoats drying near the entrance. By the time the ambulance arrived, the morning storm had faded into a soft gray drizzle, and the clouds hung low over the parking lot like tired shoulders. Lucas followed the paramedics through the automatic doors, his boots leaving faint wet prints behind him, his eyes never leaving the stretcher where Clara sat wrapped in 2 blankets with Mercy stretched carefully at her side. The dog's white coat had been cleaned only enough to reveal how bright it was beneath the mud, but the story of the night still clung to him in the damp curls along his neck, the careful bandages on his paws, and the exhausted patience in his amber eyes. Nurses looked up as they passed. Conversations softened. Even people who did not know what had happened could feel the weight of what had arrived. Not an emergency anymore. A testimony. Clara was taken to a quiet pediatric room with pale blue walls and a window overlooking a line of crepe myrtles shaking rain from their branches. Denise, the paramedic with kind eyes, helped settle her into bed while Jenna and the hospital veterinarian who had been called in from a nearby clinic examined Mercy beside her. Every time they tried to roll the dog's blanket a few inches away, Clara's fingers tightened in his fur, and Mercy lifted his head just enough to find her hand again. No one asked them to separate after that. Lucas stood near the doorway, arms folded, not from impatience, but from the old habit of keeping watch. Lieutenant Brooks had arrived quietly, speaking with county deputies in the hall, gathering facts in low voices. There would be reports, calls, questions, and people trained to make sure Clara had somewhere safe to go. Lucas understood that part. He respected it. But his attention kept returning to the small silver tag that had been removed from Mercy's collar and placed on the bedside tray. Mercy. One word, scratched thin by time. One word that now felt less like a name and more like a calling. Clara noticed him looking at it. "My dad made that," she said softly. Lucas turned toward her. Her voice was weak, but clearer now, steadied by warmth and the orange juice resting on the table. "He used to be a Marine," she continued. "He said Mercy was born white because God wanted him easy to see in dark places." Jenna paused with her stethoscope still against Mercy's side. Denise looked down at her clipboard. Lucas stepped closer, careful, gentle. "Your dad sounds like he knew dogs pretty well." Clara nodded. "He said Mercy could find a good person from miles away." She looked at Lucas then, not with fear, but with the solemn certainty children carry when they repeat words they have held onto for survival. "He told me if I ever got scared and could not reach anybody, I should trust Mercy. He said Marines do not leave people behind." The room became very still. Outside the window, a drop of rain slid down the glass and caught the morning light. Lucas felt those words settle somewhere deep, the side memories he rarely touched. He thought of every promise made in uniform, every name spoken softly at memorials, every quiet duty that survived long after the mission ended. Mercy had not understood paperwork, jurisdiction, or weather reports. He had understood one thing: find the helpers. And he had done it. Jenna finished checking him and let out a breath filled with relief. He is worn down, dehydrated, and those paws need time, but his heart is strong. Mercy opened one eye at the sound of her voice, then gave the smallest thump of his tail against the blanket. Clara smiled. It was faint, but it changed her whole face, bringing back a glimpse of the girl in the photograph, red coat, yellow leaves, sunlight caught in her hair. Lucas reached into his jacket and pulled out that photograph, now dry but still creased from the storm. He placed it on the tray beside the silver tag. Clara touched it with 2 fingers. "He carried me with him," she whispered. Lucas nodded. "Yes, ma'am. All the way." A county social worker arrived soon after, a calm woman named Mrs. Alvarez with a soft sweater, rain on her glasses, and a voice that never hurried. She explained things to Clara slowly, kindly, promising warm meals, rest, and phone calls to family members being contacted. Clara listened, but her hand remained on Mercy. Lucas watched Mrs. Alvarez notice that and make room for it without question. That was Mercy too, he thought. Not the kind that announces itself. The kind that moves a chair closer, lowers a voice, and understands that healing often comes with fur under a child's hand. By late morning, sunlight began to press through the clouds, thin but steady. It touched the edge of Clara's blanket, the silver tag, Mercy's white ears, and Lucas's dark hands resting lightly on the footboard of the bed. For the first time since the gate, Mercy slept deeply. His breathing slowed into a peaceful rhythm, no longer running, no longer searching, no longer carrying the whole world alone. Clara watched him sleep and whispered, "He found you." Lucas looked at the dog, then at the child, then at the light gathering quietly on the floor. "No," he said softly. "I think he found all of us." By afternoon, the rain had ceased entirely, leaving a soft mist over the hospital parking lot and the surrounding pine forests. The clouds parted just enough for the sun to spill in muted gold through the windows, brushing across the floor and illuminating Mercy's white fur as he lay curled beside Clara. She had finally fallen asleep, her small body relaxed against the warmth of the blankets and the steady presence of the dog who had carried her through the storm. Lucas watched quietly from a chair near the bedside, hands folded, noting the subtle rise and fall of her chest and the faint twitch of Mercy's ears as he monitored every movement in the room. Nolan sat across the small side table, checking in periodically with the county social worker over the radio, coordinating the next steps for Clara's transition to temporary care, but all three men kept their voices low, almost reverent, respecting the fragile quiet of this sanctuary. Jenna moved gently to adjust the blanket around Mercy, smoothing the fabric over his damp coat, and whispered softly, "You did well, big boy. You brought her to safety." The dog responded with a small shift, leaning slightly closer to Clara, and let out a low, contented exhale. Lucas stood and walked to the window, watching sunlight reflect on the wet asphalt outside, tiny droplets still glinting like scattered diamonds. He thought of the miles Mercy had traversed, the determination carried in those paws that had refused to falter, and the silent promise in his amber eyes that had guided them to this very room. Clara stirred, fingers curling lightly in Mercy's fur, and Lucas moved back to her side, kneeling gently. "You are safe now," he murmured, voice steady, carrying the weight of every step and mile behind those words. Mercy lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting Lucas's, a mutual understanding passing silently between them, unspoken but absolute. The veterinarian checked Mercy again, lifting each paw briefly, examining the pads and nails, then nodded with a faint smile. "He is exhausted, but otherwise stable. I will monitor him here for the next few hours, and then he can rest in a quiet space with the child." Lucas exhaled softly, feeling relief ripple through him, and watched as Clara's eyelids fluttered, the faintest curve of a smile forming as she shifted closer to Mercy, pressing a hand gently against the thick white fur. The photograph from the morning rested on the bedside tray, the little girl in the red coat smiling beside a younger Mercy, and Lucas allowed himself a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here. Outside, the mist had begun to lift, revealing distant fields and the faint glimmer of Route 17 in the sunlight, roads now passable, promises of normalcy returning to the landscape. Lucas stood slowly, brushing a strand of wet hair from his forehead, eyes sweeping the room, taking in the serene tableau of child and dog, blankets and candlelight, warmth and safety after the long night. Nolan leaned closer, quietly asking if Lucas needed him for any further coordination, but Lucas shook his head slightly. The immediate danger had passed, and what remained was simply care, attention, and quiet guardianship. He moved toward Mercy and Clara, kneeling again to brush a hand along the dog's side, feeling the subtle tension leaving the muscles, replaced by rest and trust. Clara stirred once more, whispering faintly, "Thank you, Mercy." The words, soft and small, seemed to echo in the room, carrying the full weight of relief, gratitude, and wonder. Lucas smiled gently, the first warmth of ease spreading across his face since the morning, and whispered, "No, thank you, buddy. You saved all of us." Mercy gave a slow, deliberate exhale, settling fully against Clara, head resting on the blanket, eyes closing in contented calm, and Lucas stepped back to watch, letting the moment hold, understanding that this quiet aftermath, this fragile peace, was the true reward of the night's journey, proof that loyalty, determination, and courage could carry hope across any distance, through any storm, and into safety, leaving behind a stillness filled with grace, trust, and a small, unwavering miracle.